My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old, and I thought I had lived through every kind of emotion. But that day, at my daughter Emily's wedding, a single whispered sentence shattered my heart. I wore my best dress, the one I saved for rare, special moments. I wrapped the gift myself and tucked a short speech into my purse, just a few lines, but they held a lifetime of love and sacrifice. I planned to stand, smile at my daughter, and tell her how proud I was. But I never got the chance. Between the clinking glasses and the soft music, my grandson Jacob, only 7 years old, leaned in close and whispered, "Grandma, look under the table." At first, I thought he was playing a game. But when I bent down, what I found changed everything. If you've ever felt like you no longer belong in your own family, I hope you'll stay with me through this story, because you might just see a piece of yourself in that quiet little whisper. When I looked under that table, my hands trembled. But before I tell you what I found there, I need to take you back to the years when everything was different. To the time when Emily was still my little girl, when life was hard but love was enough to keep us warm. I became a mother and a widow in the same breath. My husband, Robert, was taken from us in a car accident on a rainy night when Emily was only 4 years old. One moment I was making dinner, waiting for him to come home. The next, 2 police officers were standing at my door, their hats in their hands. I remember the way the world went silent, except for the sound of my daughter's laughter in the next room. That laughter, so innocent, was what kept me standing when I wanted to collapse. After that night, it was just me and Emily against the world. We lived in a small yellow house at the edge of town, nothing fancy, but full of memories. Every morning, I would braid her hair and pack her lunch in an old paper bag with a note that said, "Mom loves you." She used to run back from the door to kiss my cheek before the school bus arrived. We didn't have much. Dinner was often soup with day-old bread, but Emily would always say, "It's perfect, Mom." Sometimes we sat by the window, watching the streetlights turn on one by one, and she'd rest her head on my shoulder. "One day, Mom," she used to whisper, "I'll buy you a big house. You won't ever have to work again." Back then, I worked at a diner on the corner of Main Street. The pay was small, the hours long, but it was enough to keep food on the table and shoes on her growing feet. Every night, no matter how tired I was, Emily and I would read together before bed. She'd choose a story, then fall asleep before the ending, her tiny hand wrapped around my finger. There were nights I cried after she was asleep quietly, so she wouldn't hear. I worried about everything: the bills, the roof that leaked, the loneliness that crept in when the house got too quiet. But then I'd look at her sleeping face and feel something stronger than fear. I promised myself that she would never feel poor, never feel unloved. Emily grew up to be gentle and smart, always the kind of girl who wanted to make everyone happy. She used to tell people, "My mom's my best friend." And she meant it. We didn't keep secrets. She told me about her first crush, her dreams of becoming a teacher, even the things she was afraid to say out loud to her friends. On weekends, we would bake cookies together well. She did most of the eating while I did most of the baking. We'd watch old movies, our laughter echoing in that tiny living room. It wasn't a rich life, but it was a full one. Every joy, every tear we shared. Sometimes I look back and wonder when that closeness began to fade. Maybe it started the first time she came home late from college and didn't tell me why. Or maybe it was the day she met Brian, the man she said would make her dreams come true. But that's another part of the story. What I want you to understand is this: before the distance, before the hurt, there was only love. Real, honest love that came from the kind of bond only a mother and daughter can share. If you've ever looked at your child and remembered the days when they still needed you, when they still reached for your hand, then you understand what I'm talking about. Please, stay with me through this story. And if you've ever felt that same kind of ache, when love turns into silence, press like, so I'll know I'm not alone. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest of what happened, because what came after was something no mother should ever have to face. But something started to shift. The closeness that Emily and I once shared began to slip through my fingers, quietly, like sand I couldn't hold on to anymore. It began around the time she met Brian. He was polite on the surface, well-dressed, always with the right words for others. But with me, there was a wall. From the first handshake, I felt it. His smile was thin, his eyes distant. He never once called me Mom or even Margaret, just Ma'am. Like I was some stranger he had to tolerate out of obligation. I tried. God knows I tried. I invited them over for dinner, made Emily's favorite stew, baked Brian a pecan pie from scratch. He ate it, said thank you, then spent the rest of the evening scrolling through his phone while Emily cleared the dishes with me. And I told myself, he's just shy, he'll come around. But he never did. Bit by bit, I saw less of Emily. The phone calls got shorter, the visits fewer. She started saying things like, "Mom, I've just been swamped," or "We're trying to save for the wedding, so we're staying in this weekend." I told her I understood. I always said I understood. But deep down, I could feel it. She wasn't just busy, she was slipping away. And then there were the photos. Emily had once blocked me from her social media, not out of malice, she said, but because it's just easier to keep work and family separate. Still, friends would send me links or screenshots. Pictures of Emily and Brian on the beach in California, at a jazz club in New Orleans, smiling, dancing, traveling, none of which she ever mentioned to me. The first time I saw one of those photos, I sat at my kitchen table for a long while, the cup of tea in my hand going cold. She had said she was sick that weekend, too tired to talk. But there she was, in a sun hat, holding a cocktail, laughing into Brian's chest. I didn't confront her. What would I say? I didn't want to seem jealous or bitter. So I kept my questions quiet and just asked how she was whenever she did call. And each time, she answered like someone speaking through glass, distant, rushed, always about errands and work deadlines. Then one afternoon an envelope arrived in the mail. The paper was thick, elegant, with gold lettering, a wedding invitation. "Brian and Emily request the honor of your presence." I held it in my hands and stared at my daughter's name printed in cursive. I traced the letters with my fingers. For a moment, I felt something warm. She hadn't forgotten me. She still wanted me there. But even then, something in my chest didn't sit right. There was no handwritten note. No call ahead to say, "Mom, I want you there." Just an envelope like a formal gesture sent to a guest, not to a mother. Still, I circled the date on my calendar, marked it with a little red heart sticker like I used to do when Emily had school plays. I told myself this would be the day things turned around. I bought a new dress, saved up for a nice necklace, and even rehearsed a short speech just in case she asked me to say something. But as I folded the invitation and placed it carefully back in the envelope, I couldn't shake a strange feeling, one I hadn't wanted to name. It was like walking into a house where everything looked familiar, but nothing felt like home. The day of the wedding arrived with clear skies and a soft breeze, one of those picture-perfect days you only get a few times a year. I stood in front of the venue, holding the small clutch that matched my dress. I had done my hair the way Emily liked it when she was a child, soft curls pinned just right. My hands trembled slightly, more from nerves than age. I walked in alone. No one greeted me at the door. No sign of Emily, just a young woman with a headset asking for my name. I told her Margaret Bell, and she scanned her list, eyes darting up, then down again. "Oh, maybe check the table by the back wall," she said, pointing vaguely over my shoulder. I turned and walked slowly across the hall. People were hugging, laughing, holding glasses of champagne. I looked at the beautifully decorated tables, each with name cards in elegant gold lettering, none of them with mine. Then I saw it. A small table near the restrooms, tucked awkwardly behind a pillar. On it were 3 cards, one with my name, one with a woman I didn't recognize, and one with the name Staff Break Table. I was seated next to a server and an old neighbor I hadn't spoken to in over 15 years. I sat down slowly, my back stiff. Around me, people toasted, music played, and the lights above sparkled like stars that didn't belong to me. I looked down at my plate already served, already cooling. No one came to say hello. No one brought me over to take pictures with the bride. I was just there. Filler. An afterthought. When the speeches began, I leaned in, hoping maybe, just maybe, she'd mention me. A single line. A thank you. Anything. But instead, I heard her say, "I want to thank the man who's been my rock, who supported me through every hard moment, Brian's stepfather, Carl." People clapped. Some even stood. And I stayed seated, my hands folded in my lap. My name was never spoken. Not once. I stared at Emily up there, radiant in her dress, smiling like a princess in a fairy tale, and I wondered, how did I go from being her world to being no one? Tell me, if you were me, would you have stayed in that chair? Yes or no? Write it in the comments so I know I'm not the only one who ever felt this way. I didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of everyone. I kept a smile on my face, small and steady, but inside, something broke a quiet snap, like an old thread finally giving way. I touched the pendant around my neck. It was the one Emily gave me when she was 12, engraved with "Best Mom Ever." Funny how 12-year-old promises don't hold up in adult lives. I looked around the room once more and realized there was no place for me here. Not at this wedding, not in this new version of her life. And yet I stayed. At least for a little longer. Because deep down, I still held on to one fragile hope. That maybe, just maybe, she'd turn around and see me. The speeches ended, the room burst into applause, and the music rose again, cheerful and hollow. I sat there, still and silent, picking at a slice of dry chicken while people clinked glasses and leaned close for pictures. I smiled at whoever glanced my way, but none of those smiles reached my eyes. I had given up hope of being seen, truly seen. That was when I felt a little tug on my sleeve. I looked down. Jacob, my grandson, stood beside me, his dress shirt wrinkled, his little bow tie slightly crooked. His cheeks were flushed from running, and his hands were clutching something behind his back. He leaned in close, so close I could feel his breath on my neck, and whispered, "Look under the table, Grandma." I blinked. "What, sweetheart?" He didn't repeat himself, just smiled quickly, like he'd told a secret he wasn't supposed to, and ran off toward the dance floor where the other children were spinning in circles. I glanced down at the white linen tablecloth draped over my table and slowly bent forward, knees cracking quietly as I moved. I lifted the edge and peeked beneath. There, tucked under the table leg, was a folded piece of paper. I reached for it with a hand that trembled slightly, not from age this time, but from something colder, deeper. I unfolded the paper. It was a torn page from a child's notebook, the kind with big lines for early writing. The letters were uneven, a little shaky, written in crayon. But I read every word clearly. "Mom says you're just here for pictures. After this, she said we don't need to see you." For a long moment, I didn't move. The noise of the wedding around me faded into a dull blur. All I could hear was the soft crinkle of the paper in my hands and the faint echo of my own breath, shallow and stunned. My grandson, just 7 years old, had written it with the innocence only a child could have. He didn't mean to hurt me. He wasn't being cruel. He was just repeating what he'd heard, what he'd been told. And in that tiny, broken sentence, the truth came out. I wasn't invited because she wanted me there. I wasn't part of the celebration. I was decoration. A prop, a body in a chair so no one could say, "Why wasn't your mother at the wedding?" They didn't want me. Not really. Not anymore. The tears didn't fall right away. They burned in my chest first, then gathered in my throat, too heavy to release. I folded the note back up and slipped it into my purse, right next to the speech I never gave. How strange, I thought, that a child's hand could uncover the very thing I had spent months refusing to admit to myself. That my daughter, the one who used to hold my hand and call me her best friend, had planned all of this, knowing full well I was never meant to be anything more than a background presence. I sat there, still and quiet, as the music played and the toasts flowed. I didn't get up. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. But inside me, something old and steady cracked open, a small final break. And I knew without a doubt that this wedding would be the last time I would ever sit at the edge of her life, waiting to be acknowledged. I sat there for a few more minutes after reading Jacob's note, holding it gently in my lap like it might crumble if I gripped it too hard. Around me, the wedding continued without a single ripple. Laughter rose like music, champagne glasses sparkled in the light, and Emily twirled across the dance floor in her white dress, her hand in Brian's. She looked so happy, so far away. I thought about standing up and saying something, thought about walking to the microphone and telling the truth not just to the room but to her. But what would that have changed? Would it have made her see me? Hear me? Would it have brought back the girl who used to fall asleep in my arms after bedtime stories? I knew the answer. So I took a quiet breath, slid my chair back and stood. No one noticed. No one turned their head. It was like I had vanished before I even left my seat. I picked up my purse, smoothed my skirt, and walked slowly through the crowd. I didn't look for Emily. I didn't look for Brian. I looked for one small face, Jacob's. He was by the dessert table, nibbling on a cookie and laughing with another little boy. When he saw me, his eyes lit up and he waved, crumbs at the corners of his mouth. I walked over and knelt beside him. "Jacob," I whispered, brushing a crumb from his cheek. "Thank you for telling me the truth." He smiled, not quite understanding what he'd done, but happy that I was proud of him. I kissed his forehead and stood up again. Then, without another word, I walked out the door. The sun had started to set. The breeze was cooler now, brushing gently across my skin as if the world itself was reminding me that I was still here, still breathing, still whole even if a part of me had just been quietly broken. The drive home was quiet. No radio, just the hum of the tires on the road and the occasional flick of the turn signal. The closer I got to my house, the more the tightness in my chest began to loosen. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because I had made a choice. I was done waiting. When I walked through the front door, the familiar creak in the floorboards greeted me like an old friend. I slipped off my shoes, hung up my shawl, and stood for a long moment in the center of the living room. On the bookshelf sat a framed photo of Emily in her graduation gown, her arms wrapped around me, her smile so wide and real. I picked it up, brushed the dust from the glass, and held it to my chest. She had once loved me without question. That version of her might be gone now, but I was still here, and I would no longer let the love I gave be used to fill other people's silence. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea, lit a candle by the window, and sat in my old chair. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply let the stillness wrap around me like a blanket. No one would need to know what happened. No one needed to hear a speech or see a scene. I had taken my pain, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer I didn't plan to open again, because from that day forward, I would protect what little peace I had left. Even if that meant letting go of the one I loved most. The days that followed were quiet but not empty. For the first time in years, I gave myself permission to rest. Not just my body, but my heart. I removed Emily's contact from my phone, not out of anger, not to punish her, but because I needed the silence. The kind of silence that lets you hear yourself again after too long living in someone else's shadow. Each morning, I opened the curtains early and let the sun warm my living room floor. I started planting flowers in the small garden behind the house roses, mostly because Emily used to love them. And in the evenings I walked. Not to get anywhere, just to feel the rhythm of my steps, the air in my lungs. I began writing letters to Jacob, one each month. I never sent them. I kept them in a box wrapped in ribbon, dated and sealed. In each one, I told him stories about his mother as a child, about the strength and kindness, about the importance of telling the truth, even when it's hard. I don't know if he'll ever read them, but somehow writing to him reminded me that even if love is not returned, it can still be given honestly. I stopped checking social media. I stopped waiting for birthdays or holidays to bring something back. I let go not with bitterness, but with a kind of tired grace. Because sometimes loving someone means stepping away so they can become who they think they need to be, even if it means they no longer need you. Weeks passed, then months. The house grew quieter, but so did the ache. One morning, while watering the roses, I noticed a small package in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a drawing crayon on folded paper, a picture of me and Jacob sitting under a table. His handwriting at the bottom read, "I remember Grandma. I still do." No one told him to send that. No one needed to. I sat on the porch with that picture in my lap, and I cried for the first time in a long while, not out of sadness, but because somehow, even without my voice in her life, a piece of me had made it through. And in that moment, I knew I had done my part. Not perfectly, but with love. You see, being a mother, it means giving, even when you're not sure you'll receive. It means holding on, and sometimes letting go. But loving yourself, that's the part I almost forgot. If you've ever felt the way I did, seen but not valued, present but invisible, then you understand. If you do understand, please press like. If this story didn't feel right to you, That's okay too, just comment the number 6. It helps me grow and tell better stories next time. And if you want to hear more stories that speak to the heart, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes the softest voices tell the deepest truths, and the quietest goodbyes carry the loudest echoes.